Well, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this 30-minute discussion on cultural identity in a globalized world. We are, as you all know, in the midst of a national election campaign. I have promised the foreign ambassadors not to lead you astray and make you say things that you will regret afterwards. But very recently, one of the members of a political party suggested a tax on the use of English words. A newspaper columnist suggested a tax on stupid ideas, which might be more beneficial for the government. And the party, although they did withdraw the proposal very quickly, the suggestion is, in a way, or goes to the heart of what we are to talk about today: national identity and globalized culture. In the past decades, globalization has changed our worlds in very, very many ways. Business has changed incredibly fast and profoundly. So has national economies. They almost all completely dependent on the global economy. Politics have changed. The media has changed. Even religion has changed due to globalization and the influx of new ideas. But what about culture? How should we view the global impact on local and native cultures? Rebecca Matthews, you are responsible for the European Capital of Culture in Aarhus 2017. How should we view, how does globalization impact your project in Aarhus? And briefly, what is your project as you see it?
Well, globalization, of course, impacts our project hugely. I don't think you can be monocultural in a globalized world anymore. I think an international outlook, international perspective is, of course, critical. And for any of us, the days when it was enough to know only your own language or your own history, your own culture are fast disappearing. We have a global market, we have global communications, and I think it is the role, actually, of educational systems and cultural programs like ours and cultural institutions to actually instill in people, and also preferably in young people, an international outlook, or we risk being left behind. And of course, our project is an international project. Aarhus 2017 is a European capital of culture that has the highest ambition of inviting the world in, inviting art and artists to come to Denmark from around the world and to make cultural projects with us. That's incredibly important. We want them also to ask and answer through culture important global questions with us. We want to frame debates around shared challenges, shared ideas, commonalities in sustainability, diversity, democracy, all of those things. So, of course, globalization affects our project hugely because we want to learn from each other. And the other element, of course, in globalizing our project is that we also want to open up to the world and to Europe in what we're doing. We need to open the gates and enter into the historical and cultural communities that we are part of as Europeans. So Aarhus 2017 is really not just one way. It's not just about bringing international art and culture in, and it's not about taking Danish culture outwards. It's about exchange. And the power of reciprocity, learning, the local really, learning from and strengthened by the global and vice versa is what we're all about. So really globalization is at the heart of our project.
Does Danish culture, whatever it is, does Danish culture still have a place in your program?
Of course, absolutely, of course. I think European capitals of culture at their heart are local. They focus, they put a lens really for the community on local culture and values. We are looking at the things that are unique in Midtjylland. This is a project of 19 municipalities in Midtjylland, and we're focusing really on the unique strengths there and putting those strengths with global partnerships. So we're working with sustainability in Samsø, we're working with animation in Viborg, with film and TV in Aarhus, with gastronomy across the region, all of those extraordinary strengths. And all of our projects, over 160 of them, have a kernel, a core that is about local strength, building, connecting with international partners so that the cooperation is really what makes things extraordinary. It's the local and the global together.
I would now like to turn to you, Mr. Ambassador Rufus Gifford. Like very many in this country and in many other countries in the world, I grew up on a cultural diet of Hollywood movies, of American television series. I should add quite a few British ones as well. American music and British music. It has all dominated the global cultural scene. Does it go the other way? In the sense, how does globalization affect American culture?
Yes. Well, first, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to participate in this panel, and I'm so happy that my first event of this Folkemødet is honoring the city of Aarhus, because I know that in the variety of different times that I've spent in the city, and I see the mayor standing back there. Thank you. I heard you were out running. It might have been because I beat you in the half marathon last year, but and the Aarhus half marathon. Yeah, but so it truly it's such a magical city, and I'm thrilled that that it has earned this title of European Culture Capital. I just realized that it's the opening of the European of Aarhus as the Culture Capital is actually, I think, the day after the new president will be sworn in.
That's right.
So whether I'm ambassador or not, I look forward to coming as a private citizen and witnessing this, because I think it's incredibly special. But sorry, now to your question. Denmark is paying the United States back, I would argue, dramatically for the cultural impact that we have had on the world. And let me give you a few examples. And I say this to Danes everywhere I go, that your brand is a cultural powerhouse, as a powerhouse generally, but your brand as a cultural powerhouse is being heard in New York, it's being heard in Washington, and it's certainly being heard in Los Angeles. The TV examples, of course, are obvious, where you look at the Killing or Born or the Bridge, all of which have either been shown in the United States, or which I think is the imitation is the best form of flattery, of course, that they've all been ripped off and produced by American networks. Above and beyond that, you look at the successes that Danish architects have had, whether it's Bjarke Ingels, who has gotten a design to rebuild Lower Manhattan, the Smithsonian on the Washington Mall, and just recently a building at the World Trade Center. And this is a guy who owns his Danish brand. He's not trying to be American. He's trying to be Danish to sell to the American market. And that is amazing, and something I'd like to see, frankly, more Danish culture infiltrate the United States. There's too many other examples, but I'll give you one more before is Klaus Meyer. Food. I hope everybody thinks food is culture. I think it is. Klaus Meyer is opening up a new restaurant in Grand Central Station. You can't get any more American than that. And he's not selling, apple pie and Coca-Cola. He is selling Danish food. And celebrating Danish food. And so I am actually excited to really explore this further, because there's so much more cultural exchange that we can invest in. And these are just a few examples. I could give a million more, but it's just things that have happened really in just recent weeks, of really tangible examples of where our culture, yes, I think our culture has enriched the world at various times, but Danish culture is doing exactly the same thing, and I think that's worth acknowledging and celebrating as well.
Thank you. But do you see the US being under pressure, or is there resistance from the cultural initiatives in Europe and Asia?
when you see a resistance, I'm not sure what.
No, but is there a reaction towards the globalization? Which you may.
Well, I would argue this. So I think globalization is inherently a positive thing. It's absolutely, and I think a country like mine, which is so international to begin with, it's sort of the fabric of our country is the fact that we're ridiculously diverse, have immigrants from all over the world. Were they not to infuse our country with their own sense of culture, I think it would be a huge missed opportunity. I think American culture is only American culture because of the melting pot that is the United States. So I hope that American culture today will not be American culture 5 years from now. It needs to evolve. It needs to evolve with the people that live there, because that's the magic of culture. So I would never say that American culture would be adversely impacted by what's happening in the other world, the rest of the world. I think it's the opposite. I think we are richer for what's happening around the world and in other countries around the world, and I don't see that changing.
Ambassador Vivien Life, Britain has a rather skeptical approach to the EU, and before next year or the year after next year, 2017, your country will have an EU referendum. It may change Europe dramatically. We don't hope so. How do you view the globalization of cultures, and does the British skeptical mood towards Europe or the EU have anything to do with this, with the globalization of cultures?
Thanks very much. There's a lot packed into that. Just to go back to the EU point, first of all, our Prime Minister wants to keep us in Europe, but we want to reform Europe. So I don't want to put this under an anti-Europe sceptical heading. And a lot of the arguments that he and ministers are making about why Europe needs to reform, with Britain still in it, is about Europe in the world. So it's within a context of globalization and a need for Europe to compete. So I don't think you can characterize the government's position as an anti-globalization one, but more about how can the EU do better in the world. In terms of the cultural sphere, I don't think that's really impacting on people's attitudes to the EU. There are concerns about some very rapid migration that's occurred, but the debates you hear about that are about things like jobs and access to school and so on. I think as far as culture goes, I describe Britain in very much the same kind of way that Rufus describes the United States, a fantastic mix of all kinds of cultures. And if you include food in that, then chicken tikka masala, a dish that doesn't even exist in India, is an incredibly popular British dish and a great British export. And when you're talking about Danish exports, I'd add sticks and sushi to that, as well as the characteristic Danish food, which has now loomed up in my local town in Britain. So I think I would separate those two out. I think we feel pretty confident about British culture in the world and an evolving British culture. I think the thing that absolutely epitomized that for me was the opening ceremony for the Olympic Games a couple of years ago, which just had bits and pieces from all over the world coming together and being something that we celebrated as British. And I think we'll carry on being confident about that as we try and approach the EU reform agenda.
Britain and the United States has a great advantage of being English-speaking countries, native English-speaking countries. The French government has invested huge amounts of money to nourish and preserve their vision of a unique French culture and language. Do you do anything like the French, or do you need to do anything?
I think we don't feel the need to do a sort of defensive protection of the English language at home, but we do see the English language as a fantastic tool for how we project ourselves overseas. And we have an institution called the British Council, where Rebecca used to work, that right around the world teaches English, introduces people to English, uses English as a way to open up other cultures to what's going on in the world, because English has become such a universal language. So I guess we see English in that kind of way, not as so much a projection of Britain, so much as a tool for opening up the world and bringing the world together and helping everybody be globalized in a good way. But we, in terms of our culture, yes, we do have cultural institutions. We project the institutions. We're proud of them, and they're part of how we want to project Britishness as well.
I would like to ask all three of you the same question, because you're now in a country of 5.5 million people, Danish speaking, where the attitude towards globalization is probably to many people as positive as you have described it, and as you said, Ambassador Gifford, that it's positive. But quite a few Danes think it's not positive. There's a protective sense in the country. And what are, in your views, just briefly, the advantages and disadvantages of a globalized culture? Please
go first. Gosh, the advantages so outweigh the disadvantages that I don't even. It's so easy to start with the advantages. So I'll
go. Mentioned quite a few of them already.
Yeah. No, I think look, a globalized world, a multicultural world, it just, in my mind, it makes for a more well-rounded society, a richer society, an interesting society that pushes you, that challenges your notions of what's of really, whether it's politics or culture or whatever it is. And I think, in democracies, that's actually vital to the continued development of democracy. The concept of new blood continually being brought into it. And that's partially people turning 18, of course, but I also think it's immigration. I also think it's people coming in and experiencing this culture and becoming part of it for a variety of different reasons. So I look from an American perspective here, and I will say this: I do understand the sensitivity, but it's inherently positive. And for me to even mention negatives, I understand them, and I understand them conceptually, but I just don't see them as disadvantages. Of course, there's going to be struggles with language and cultural adaptation and all those sorts of things, but I believe any strong society, any strong democracy can work through those struggles. I don't know that they can necessarily work through being completely isolated from the rest of the world. So I do believe that multiculturalism, diversity, all of those sort of key words that we use all the time are really inherently positive.
Thank you, Rebecca Matthews. It's just, I just like to put it into context, the question, because
Sure.
you are British yourself.
I am.
And you are the CEO of Aarhus 2017. So it's not a Dane who is in charge of that. How do you see this, the advantages and the disadvantages of a globalized culture in that context? Do you encounter the protectionism within the Danish community?
Look, I'm very much with the ambassador, actually. I see the advantages much more strongly than I see the disadvantages. Aside from the very basic stuff, which is just that it's educational, it's enriching, it's entertaining to learn about the way other people live, what other people eat, how other people share their culture with you. Basic level. Also, I think that sharing culture globally allows us also to maybe share opportunities to look at problem solving for shared global challenges. I think there's a great way of working together in the world to look at how we simply do things better. The British Council is an example of that in many ways. In practical terms, globalization of culture, I think, is a very important thing. We know from research that sustained cultural interaction and interchange between countries builds trust. Trust underpins trade. If people understand your culture, your arts, your language, your society, your politics even, they're much more likely to visit or to study in or to do business in your country in the future. The reality is that business doesn't exist in isolation from the societies or the cultures in which it's conducted. So in practical terms, I think it's also very important. But in more humanistic terms, I think, and I see this all the time in what I'm doing both in 2017, but also particularly in the work in the British Council, culture has a huge role to play on a global stage. You know, we're living in times of increasing change and flux, politically, economically challenging times. You know, we've seen that play out. Europe coming out of this deep economic malaise, the UK from severe austerity measures not so long ago, US also similarly, the Arab Spring, all of these things that have shown that harmony across the world, I think, has seemed to be an increasingly elusive goal to reach. And in those moments, people often think that culture and the arts are in many ways a kind of take a back seat to a more overt means of resolution. What I think in those moments is that culture and the globalization and understanding of each other through culture, the art, and I think it is an art, of speaking softly on the ground amongst each other has never been more critical. That's why I think that the globalization of culture, projects and programs of international standing are incredibly important. And that's what we're trying to do at Aarhus 2017 as well. You know, the idea of putting people together in a room, face to face, whether that's in a theatre, whether that's on a sports field, whether that's in a university classroom, whatever, and asking them to create something together will mean that they look for their commonalities, they look for their similarities, and they don't look for their differences. And there's a real power in that. That's the kind of work that we want to be doing. And you don't lose your local culture in that, which is, I think, what you're about to ask me, maybe. I don't know.
Yes.
The point is in that, I think, that if you have a confidence and a surety in what your national culture offers, the only way to work with that is to share it and to open it up.
And Ambassador Life, advantages and disadvantages in regard to cultural globalization?
Well, like the other two, I haven't really got any thoughts on disadvantages. I was listening to what Rufus said. A lot of the time we do compare Britain and Denmark and think we have a lot in common. We're two slightly cold, wet places on the edge of Europe who've had a fantastic tradition of trading and shipping and being out in the world. And Denmark has got a huge amount to offer in terms of culture. And that's why I'm actually really excited about Aarhus 2017. Because when I look at the figures of how many Danes are going to Britain for their culture, they're huge numbers of Danes go to Britain. They say they're going for cultural reasons. It's about time you attracted a few more people back here and were even more part of that globalized culture through doing that. And Aarhus 2017 is an important symbol of it, but it's got to be part of a process. There's everything that Rufus was saying about Danish culture, which is beginning to be more visible in our countries, but there's a whole lot more that could happen. And Denmark being open to that, even more open to the world culturally, welcoming people in and showing off everything that's great about Danish culture, I can only see upside to that, I'm afraid. Sorry not to give you more controversy.
Well, thank you anyway. Ambassador Gifford, do you see more protectionist measures or initiatives like the ones from France, maybe from Germany, or even from the United States in coming years? Do you see cultural?
About cultural protectionism.
As a reaction, as a reaction towards
globalization.
To globalization.
I think from an American standpoint, I don't see it. I sure hope not, frankly. I don't see it. I would argue. I would argue quite emphatically that political chapter of our history, of our recent history, our somewhat more protectionist recent chapter is waning, is ending. So I don't see that. I really do believe that the final 2 years of the Obama administration, and then whomever we elect in 2016 to take, of course, something different could happen, but I really do believe that Americans inherently are not protectionists. They are inherently internationalists, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. But we like sharing the good parts of our culture with the world, and so I really do think that that trend will continue. As for the rest of the world, I think others might have a better perspective than that, but I do hope. But generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of cultural protectionism. I think that I do not believe that protecting your culture and being international those are not mutually exclusive terms. I think you can very easily share your culture and celebrate your culture internationally and don't have to be threatened that it's being lost. And so I would hope that that is not a continued trend, frankly.
A final question to the three of you. The great Indian, Mahatma Gandhi, once was asked, what do you think of Western culture? And he said, I think it would be a good idea. You are all from outside of Denmark. What do you think of Danish culture?
I get to go first again?
You can use the Mahatma Gandhi answer.
I mean, look, not to mince words, but I love it. I do, and I don't.
And what is it to you?
I could talk about this for a very, very long time, but it's not something that Americans understand. So I will tell you that I didn't know what Danish culture was until I set foot in Copenhagen on August 30th, 2013. But since that day, I have experienced of course, a small country, but a country that is so rich in tradition and culture. And whether that's food or architecture or design or television or art or any one of a number of different things, it's special. And it's very, very, those of you who've heard me speak before know that I talk about this a lot. I think you need to share this with the world because it is special and it's unique to you. Or at least, certainly the Scandinavian culture there is unique to you. And it's inherently positive in other parts of the world. And I think, speaking as an American, we're actually hungry for this. We're hungry for sustainability. We're hungry for things that are well-made and clean and green and beautiful. And so, bring it on. Come, give us more, sell us more, because we want it.
Thank you. Ambassador Life, what is your...
So equally, I've been here a year longer than Rufus. I have absolutely loved, and it's very difficult to sort of disentangle it or distill what it is. I think there is, as you say, that strand around good design. There is that strand around sustainability, but linked to that also, I know that there's wonderful contrast between beautiful, clean white lines and then the wonderful sense of hygge and coziness and all of that you get at Christmas. And I was asked in one interview, okay, it was one of those silly interviews where you have to choose between two things where you want to say yes. Which do you want most, winter hygge or white summer nights? And I said, well, I guess it's the white summer nights, but I don't really want to have to choose. And although that's a phenomenon of nature, what I love is the way that is so wound into the culture. Here we are in Bornholm. Why are we here now? It's part of that wonderful celebration of everything that's around you and the linking perhaps a little bit more closely to your environment than we do somewhere like the UK. So like Rufus, I could ramble on forever, hugely passionately. You'll be pleased to know I do this in the UK. All my visitors who come love it and will come back. So we'll get those tourist numbers going up slightly, even if it's just the friends of Rufus and Vivien who are coming through.
Very true.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca Matthews. Short answer to a complicated question.
Well, I think both the ambassadors have answered everything on my behalf. I have to say, I arrived here about the same time you did, and I'd been married to a Dane for a lot longer than when I arrived here, and it was only really when I started living and working in Denmark 2 years ago that I really began to understand what Danish culture truly was. And I also am a huge fan of hygge, the summer white nights, and all of the other things that we've talked about. I think Danish culture is extraordinary. I really do think it's amazing. I think one of the things I would encourage, and I think this is going back to the question of, as a foreigner running a Danish cultural program, I think I can do it more, is to lose the jantelone a bit and to be a little bit prouder. And to take the culture out into the world a little bit more bravely and a little bit more boldly, because it is extraordinary, it is unique, everyone wants it and no one else has got it. And so if I can do that as an English woman, I'll boast loudly.
Excellent. We will thank you for that. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. And I will now, you are not allowed to go out into the white summer nights, because I will now pass on the word to Niels Højbjerg. Thank you very much.